Good morning. We began yesterday by looking at a new series on asking God for the impossible. And we saw there as the disciples were on the boat, and Jesus had just fed the 5,000. And Jesus sends them ahead of him and says to go and he'd meet them on the other side. But as they're going, in the middle of the night, somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, a storm rose. And as that storm began to get worse and worse, the disciples began to fear. Then all of a sudden, Jesus came walking towards them on the water. Now, when that happened, he, of course, gave what we outlined as a charge, a cause, and a command. The charge was, be of good cheer. The cause, Jesus said, it is I. The command, be not afraid. That's a good practical lesson for all of us today. God wants us to be happy because he is with us. We don't need to be afraid and anxious. But then Peter did something that was extremely interesting. He said, Lord, bid me come unto thee. He asked God to allow him to walk out on the water. Now, he'd already seen God in Matthew chapter number 8 calm the waves, calm the sea, and be on board the boat, and peace be still. He didn't ask him to do any of those things. Instead, he asked him, he said, can I come out to you? I want to encourage you to not be afraid to ask God for the impossible. James chapter number 4 and verse number 2 says, ye have not because ye ask not. A lot of times we don't ask for the impossible because we've never seen it. But we've never seen it because we never ask. If you're facing a situation that seems to be impossible for you, and there are 1,001 illustrations that we could go to right now, I just want to encourage you not to be afraid to ask, because God said, with man it may be impossible, but with God nothing shall be impossible. And I think a lot of times we don't see the impossible happen because, quite frankly, we don't ask. Peter watched as the Lord had fed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And I believe something in Peter's heart said, if he can do that, he can do anything. I think our churches are we're missing a lot of the power of God. We don't ask God to do things, and we see large expenses or new church plants or missions or whatever the case may be, in a bus ministry or whatever it may be, and we think, well, that's just out of our reach. Have you asked God? Maybe there's a sickness, and maybe you say, well, there's no way, there's no hope. And I don't care what doctors say. Have you asked God? Maybe your situation in life or a mountain that you're facing says, I can never get over this. But have you asked God? Don't be afraid to ask God for the impossible. Now, I want to preface this, and before I even get into the lesson really for the week, by saying that the Lord could have said, no, Peter, stay in your boat. And had he said that, he would still be just as much God. Or he could have said, no, Peter, you stay right there. And listen, Peter's faith wouldn't have been any less. But the fact is this, Peter saw the impossible happen. The disciples saw the impossible happen. We're still 2,000 years talking about the impossible happening because Peter wasn't afraid to ask. And so I want to encourage you this week, not be afraid to ask God for the impossible, because our God can do anything. So friend, don't be afraid. Ask him to do the impossible.